im se svima, i malima i velikima, i bogatima i siromašnima, i slobodnjacima i robovima, dade žig na njihovu desnu ruku ili na čela njihova, te da nitko ne može ništa kupiti ili prodati.
Pozdrav dragi narode, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Slobodni. Cenzura. Ta riječ je nešto što smo mislili da je relikt prošlosti. Međutim, čini se da ponovo o tome moramo razgovarati. Možda neki nisu vjerovali, ali to se danas naziva na mnogo različitih imena. Ali idemo mi na stvar razgovarati sa mojom današnjom gošćom koja je proučila novi takozvani The European Media Freedom Act. Kako to dobro zvuči. Moja današnja gošća je novinarka Tayler Hudak. Od sada nadalje ćemo razgovarati na engleskom jeziku. Hello Taylor, welcome to our show in Croatia.
Hi, thank you for having me. Great pleasure to be here.
Can you tell a few words about yourself and about your work?
Yes, so I am a journalist. I am originally from the United States. I spent the majority of my life there, but I'm now based in Budapest, and I have been doing work for the LastAmericanVagabond.com, Activism Munich, as well as Children's Health Defense Europe. And so this latest piece that we will discuss today is about the European Media Freedom Act, and that was published through Children's Health Defense Europe. You can find that article at childrenshealthdefense.eu, and it has also been translated into several languages, European languages, to make it accessible to more people.
And we have to say that it's also translated in Croatian.
Yes.
Yeah, we will put a link below this video. But okay, let's start. What is this European Media Freedom Act?
Yes, so this European Media Freedom Act, or EMFA, is truly an unprecedented proposal that was put forward, of course, by the European Commission back in 2022. And essentially what this proposal seeks to do is to centralize the media sector in the EU into a single market that will be overseen by the European Commission itself and national regulatory authorities. So what you have here is the Commission proposing an act that essentially puts the Commission in complete and total control of the media sector. And in order to understand the significance of this proposal, perhaps we do want to discuss the current framework and the current legislation over the media sector in the EU. And so the EMFA seeks to expand upon the existing framework, which is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, or AVMSD. And so this proposal will amend the AVMSD. And the current advisory body to the Commission under the AVMSD is the European Regulators Group for Audiovisual Media Services, or ERGA. The ERGA will be replaced by a new European Board for Media Services, or the board. And it's the job of the board to ensure compliance with the EMFA regulation, and it is given far more authority than what is currently given to the ERGA. So what you can expect is more control, more censorship, and more regulation of information, both online and offline on social media. Now, an important component to this as well, and many of the viewers may already be aware of the differences in the various legislations. So the current framework is a directive. The proposal, the EMFA, is a regulation. And this is the first time that we have seen a regulation being proposed and progressed through the EU legislative process, which seeks to really monitor and control the media sector. This has raised serious questions as to whether or not the EU Commission is even allowed to propose a regulation to monitor the media sector. That's actually not just my opinion, but this is the professional legal assessment of a gentleman named Ilias Kontias, who is is the executive director of the European Magazines Media Association, as well as the European Newspapers Association. And he was able to speak with me in preparation for this article, and his expertise is provided throughout this piece, and he is very much critical of the EMFA. So it's very important that as we discuss today this legislation, that we understand it in the context of unprecedented controls being given to the European Commission over the media sector, and also the fact that it is incredibly unpopular by legal media professionals and the press sector in general.
Okay.
Now,
let's before we are going deeply, can we explain to our audience what is different between directives and regulations?
Yes. So again, this is a very important point. In the EU, there are several types of laws. You have directives, regulations, decisions, recommendations, and opinions. But we'll focus here on the differences between directives and regulations, because that's what's pertinent to this particular piece here. So a regulation, which again, the EMFA is a proposed regulation. It is a type of EU law that sets an objective and it defines how to achieve it. Once this law is adopted, it is effective immediately in all member states. It's legally binding. It supersedes national laws, and all member states are really limited in their ability and how they can determine how they can achieve a particular objective. Whereas a directive is also a type of EU law that sets an objective, but it does not define how the member states should achieve the given objective. Member states are allowed to impose national laws. In that way, they can achieve a certain objective. So a regulation is far more strict in the sense that member states will not have flexibility in how they choose to reach or adhere to a certain objective. And as I said earlier too, the executive director of the EMMA has stated that there are serious questions and debates as to whether or not the Commission is allowed to propose a media regulation.
Well, I see here something interesting, calling European Board for Media Services. There is some board, political board, who will give services to media. But what kind of services? Okay, let's explain. What is this European Board for Media Services?
Yes. So in this proposal, as I said, the EMFA establishes a new European Board for Media Services. And throughout this discussion today, I'll refer to it as the board. That's what it is referred to throughout the proposal. And this European Board for Media Services is really being portrayed as an independent body, at least in the press releases and all of the speeches that are really celebrating this EMFA. But if you look at the fine print, and if you actually read through this proposal, and that's exactly what I did for this particular article in Children's Health Defense Europe, you'll see that it is anything but independent. So in Article 9, it lays out the so-called independence of the board. And if you look actually at the structure of the board, which is discussed in Article 10, you will see that it is composed of representatives from national regulatory authorities, and each of those members, of course, will have one vote. However, there will also be a member of the Commission who is assigned to the board. So the board will have a representative from the Commission. And while that representative may not have voting rights, they are still obligated to participate in all of the board's activities. And it is also the job of the board to really keep the Commission up to date on its activities. And again, the board is in a position of having to instruct and oversee the media sector.
That means
and also
they will have from the side of Commission somebody who can influence on the media. They don't have permission to vote, but they have other tools to impact on media. Am I right?
That's exactly right. And that will be made very clear as I get into exactly the tasks of the Commission. But in fact, it was Ilias Kontias said that during an event just a few months ago, the Commission had plans to assign 8 to 10 people to the board, which is extremely significant, even if they do not have voting rights. That's a tremendous amount of influence that the commission, an unelected, unaccountable body, would have over the media sector in the EU. So to say that this European Board for Media Services is independent is completely false if you just read through this text. And I just want to make this point very clear to the listeners. If you go ahead and you look at some of the press releases that have been put forward or any of the speeches celebrating the EMFA, there's a lot of positive language being used. It's really marketed as an effort and an initiative to promote media pluralism and independence, but it's truly anything but that. And so a deep dive, an extensive look into this text will prove otherwise. And if you read the article, you'll be able to see that. And not only will...
Can you say, it's important now, can you explain us on one example how they can, for example, have an impact and we cannot see right now according to the proposal?
Well, I think that it's fair to say that if the commission has someone appointed to participate in all activities, and the board is essentially in a position in which it has to report to and make decisions in agreement with the commission, you would have to expect that the commission is going to have a tremendous amount of influence over the EU media sector. I think if you look, if we want to talk about examples further on here, if you look at what the tasks of the board are, that will be made really clear. But just one more point, not only will the board have a member of the commission assigned to it, but the board will have a secretariat which will be provided by the commission, and it will be the job of the secretariat to closely coordinate with the board and its chair. Now, it is also important to note too quickly, and again, I just want to get through this background information because it's important to understand exactly what's in this EMFA. The IMCO committee, that is the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection, and also the LEAB committee, that is the Civil Liberties, Justice, and Home Affairs Committee, has issued opinions on this legislation, and they do somewhat seek to limit the role of the commission in the board, but it's still very much there, in which their draft opinions do allow for the commission to have tremendous influence over the board. But we can now take a look perhaps at what the tasks of the board are, but I just want people again to understand as we talk about the board's duties, obligations, that it is not an independent body, but we have to expect it's heavily influenced by the commission.
How will they elect the members of this board?
Yeah, interesting question. So they will not be elected by the public, of course. They will be the board will be consisting of members of national regulatory authorities. So
national, you said.
Yes.
That means politicians from each country can send somebody in this board.
That's what it appears. So it just mentions members of national regulatory authorities will be members of this board. There will also be a vice president and a president, a secretariat provided by the commission, and a representative from the commission.
Okay, let's imagine. Now, all members of the European Union, 27 members, now want to send some commission, and they are electing, for example, in Hungary or in Croatia. How they are electing their representative in this board? Through politician, or there is a public opinion about this?
No, I do not believe the public would have too much say in exactly the board's functioning and its structure. That's not too much a big part of this piece. What's really, I think, a key point here is the unprecedented authority that is given to the commission through this board. I really view it as the board sort of being an intermediary of the commission and the media sector. And it is the job of the board, again, to support the commission. And it's in a supportive and advisory position. And it very much has to answer to the commission. And I go through this, article in depth. You'll see constant references to when the board is requested by the commission, it must do X, Y, Z, and upon the request of the commission, the board must do this. So it's very much in a subservient role here. But I think now that we really understand the structure of this board, again, consisting of members of national regulatory authorities, it will have a vice president and president, as well as a representative from the commission. Perhaps it's good to take a look at and discuss what exactly they're seeking to do and to enforce. And there's constant references throughout the text about media service providers being a grave risk to public security. And again, media service providers is defined as any natural or legal person who provides a media service, essentially. It's a very broad definition. And again, just to go back to what's currently in place, under the AVMSD, it applies to audiovisual media, which is just that, audiovisual media, whereas this applies more broadly to include the press sector as well. And while this is a piece of legislation that is somewhat similar to what we have already, it's important to note that this further empowers and provides a legal substantiation to what's already happening in the EU with censorship and the blocking of content from certain news organizations.
Okay, let's make some example. You said the Commission will have much greater power. For example, let's go to social media, for Facebook. Now, what will be position of Commission in case that board is deciding there's some, they're calling disinformations on social media, and somebody is spreading this information, what there will be their possibility to do it according to new powers?
So right now, we know that with the Digital Services Act, it gave unprecedented power to online platforms to censor, block, and control content. In Article 17, you'll see an extension of this. It establishes that media service providers essentially have to enter into a contractual agreement with providers of very large online platforms, or VLOPs. VLOPs are entities such as, but not limited to, Google, Amazon, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Rumble. Those are very large online platforms, VLOPs. It will essentially be up to the media service provider. So say yourself, if you want to upload content to one of these platforms, before you're able to even do that, you have to enter into a contractual agreement that is written up by the commission, or heavily influenced by the commission again, and it basically will require you to declare that you are a media service provider, to declare that you're editorially independent from member states, and that you also have a self-censorship or a self-regulatory protocol in place. So before you can even upload to the platforms, you must do that. And then also too, you must provide contact details of the relevant national regulatory authorities should you happen to post something that is considered a grave and serious risk to public security.
What could be grave and serious threat? Let's go back, for example, 2 years ago, okay? We have now example that in a court case, they are talking about ivermectin. Paul Merrick was suing CDC because they didn't allow to use ivermectin. And lawyer from side of CDC says now that no, they are not for, they are allowing anybody can give ivermectin against COVID-19. And when the judge asked them, why did you tweet it that you are not horse, think over it, they said, we were joking. But that was 2 years ago, and in the meantime, thousands of people die, and we know now that they could use this very cheap protocol to save their lives, but after 2 years, nobody cares. And they said, no, you could give people this ivermectin. Let's go back now. In this case, that this law is already present, what could happen now when we know that this cure was available, but somebody says on the media it is not? What commission can do?
They'll take the content down, and they will also restrict your reach, and they will also be able to prevent you from posting again in the future, and you will not be able to have a sustainable media career. You will not be able to have a sustainable way of providing information to the public and uploading to these platforms. So it would be total censorship. This is not actually speculation at all. It's in the fine print here. These very large online platforms are given an immense amount of power to essentially remove information, censor content, if it is deemed to be a public security risk. And you asked me, well, what is a public security risk? It's not explicitly stated in this proposal, but we can expect that's anything that goes against the establishment narrative. So any information about ivermectin being a useful treatment for COVID-19 would absolutely, I can assume, fall under this this so-called grave risk to the public security. Anything that challenges the establishment narrative, you can expect that to be considered a risk to public security, because by default in this proposal, it considers any media service provider that is from outside the EU by default to be a risk to public security. And while this proposal claims to be about media pluralism, it's anything but, because it's completely restricting your access to content. We know now today that if you're in the EU, if you're not using a VPN, you cannot access content or articles from RT, formerly Russia Today, or Sputnik, because it is a Russian news organization that's considered to be damaging and harmful information. Of course, that's the official story that is put forward, that it's damaging and harmful, and so that content is being blocked. Well, under this proposal, expect more of that. This gives this further legal substantiation to continue to do that. So there's a real-world example that we all experience, not being able to access content if you're in the EU. This will continue to be an even more severe problem. I mean, I didn't put this into the article, but I have to say this is an unprecedented move by the commission to interfere into the media sector. It is deeply concerning, and everybody listening right now needs to take a look at this. You don't need to understand the fine details, but if you're interested, read the article. But this is something we all ought to be paying attention to, really getting vocal about, because this is going to be complete control of the information space in a way that we have never seen before.
Yeah, there's a whole list for YouTube. I was banned from YouTube after my second interview. And there's a whole list what you cannot mention on YouTube. Half of this list are truth. One of this is also this cure for COVID-19. But there is a whole list for YouTube. But now you are mentioning even Rumble, of BitChute, or any other platform, because my channel is on Rumble, also on BitChute. And there's no censorship. At the same time, I have to also say that Telegram is very safe concerning censorship. But now, according to the new law, even these platforms will be in the dangers.
That's exactly right. So it won't really be left up to these different platforms and how they implement their content moderation. It will be mandatory for them under this regulation to adhere to a standard protocol in how they censor and monitor information. Let me repeat that, because it's a very important point, and I hope that it really makes sense and hits home for people. And that is that right now you see different platforms, while they are censoring, and that's concerning, they are able to sort of craft how they want to implement that censorship. I'm not downplaying it, but I'm just saying it's not uniform coming from the top, coming from the commission. With this EMFA, it will be uniform. They will be it will be mandatory for these various platforms, Rumble, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all of these very large online platforms. They will have to adhere to the board's list of requirements. That's what will happen. It will be uniform across the board. So that it will be uniform across the various platforms. So that is how serious this is.
Well, in this case, let's go in the near future. We are now talking about grave danger from the climate changes. I had the interview just a few days ago with a specialist one, who is the expert, who wrote a few books and who is professor. And she says differently. She's not saying that we are in the grave dangers, and she thinks that it's not according to science, it's according politicians. But let's say now somebody on Rumble or YouTube publish interview with her where she says that we are not in the grave danger from climate changes, things will not happen as they telling you on television. What can happen with this interview?
Well, what can happen is that under this proposal, as I mentioned earlier, the media service provider, whoever uploads this content, will be obligated to enter this contractual agreement, and they will also be obligated to provide the contact information of the relevant national regulatory authorities. So if the very large online platforms feels that this content is in violation of any of the code of conduct that is within this EMFA, or that it poses a grave and serious risk to public security, the relevant national regulatory authority for that media service provider could be contacted, and the content can be removed. Now, yes, they do allow an option for the media service provider to enter into some sort of negotiation or discussion with the board, but that's not even so much relevant here, as is the fact that this is an unprecedented oversight and regulation of the media sector, that you have these entities who are in a position of overseeing what is true and what is not, and what's a risk to public security and what is not, which is, by the way, just total nonsense about being a risk to public security. That's a great way to just to give a pass to censorship.
Of course, they have to use these words like risk for public security or danger from international concerns. We heard lots about this, especially when WHO comes into the picture. They are now trying to even take much more power for situation for international concerns. And for sure, beside pandemic, everything else can be situation of international concerns, because Tedros, Chief General of WHO, can decide what is danger. And now we can say, who is the Ministry of Truth? Who will decide what is the truth? For example, for climate changes.
Yeah, it will be up to essentially this board and this commission to draft up those guidelines, and that is not going to be involving the public and the public opinion at all. So it will be left up again to this unaccountable body, the European Commission, who is given unprecedented controls over various aspects of EU way of life, and that's what's going to happen. It is very draconian. It's also very, we hear the phrase Orwellian, and it's used often, but it's really true. I mean, think about it. A European board for media services run pretty much by the commission, and it is going to be up to this board to ensure compliance with the regulation, which really seeks to control access to content and also to restrict journalists, content creators, in what they can and cannot say. Because if you have so many so-called violations of this particular regulation, the very large online platforms will be obligated to essentially just remove you altogether. You won't be able to publish any information. You won't be able to have any reach. And this is what it's looking like. And while there have been some minor improvements, this is not something that I think should be amended, that should be revisited, that should be in any way revised. This legislation needs to be rejected altogether. And it's not just me that's saying that. It is a lot of different news organizations, press freedom agencies that are saying this. In fact, there was an open letter. I have to pull it up here. It's very important. There was an open letter that was issued by several press publishers and press publishers associations to the EU co-legislators, in which they state that the EMFA must live up to its name. And their concerns are that there has been an unprecedented amount of censorship within the past few years, and that this EMFA is only going to be a continuation of that censorship. The proposal, or the open letter rather, that expresses its concerns about this proposal even states that the EMFA not only does not live up to its name, again, it's called the European Media Freedom Act, but several of the provisions in this proposal are in fact counterproductive to protecting press freedom. This is really key here. So this is something that's being universally condemned, and we all should take a stance to make sure this does not go through.
Let's imagine now it's a much different situation when we have really huge impact of social media, because today we have a space where regular persons in any field can say something what they think, or even say something what can improve our life in the future. Let's imagine now we have in today's Galileo Galilei, who have a profile on Facebook or TikTok, on Twitter, and he says what he said a few centuries ago. Now he will be banned because this board and this commission will say this is dangerous for our world.
That's exactly right. Yeah, information, anything that challenges the establishment, that is a check on power, a check on authority, will likely be deemed to be a so-called public security risk and safety risk, and so that information will be removed. I mean, this is a tactic that has been used for some time now. Anytime information comes out that is, challenging to the authority or threatening to the authority, which is really what the point of journalism is to be a check on power. Anytime this information will come to light, there's always this excuse, this could pose a risk to public security. So we see the same excuse used time and time again. I encourage everybody, don't fall for it. This is such an insult to the public, to you listening right now, this EMFA. It really destroys and damages your right to have access to information. There's a lot of discussion in this proposal about media pluralism and having access to a wide range of content, when this proposal is anything but. It's going to limit what you have a right to view, and you as a listener have a right to obtain and read and watch a wide range of information coming from various sources, and you can come to your own determination as to what is true and what is false, what you believe and what you do not believe. It is not up to this unelected, unaccountable board and run by the commission to make that determination for you.
Well, that means if in case that some whistleblower comes and say, look, president of commission was sending some SMS messages to the chief of the big company who was selling 70 billion worth products to European Commission. And this is for sure big dangers for our security. In this case, Commission can say, no, this information cannot be published anywhere, in any platform, in any media, because it's threats to our national security.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. It makes me wonder, how can any journalist or anyone be able to hold the commission itself accountable for potential abuses of power when the media sector is run by the commission? it won't be able to be done. You won't be able to do it. And the information that we have had access to with regard to text messages from members of the European Commission, that sort of information is going to be censored to an extreme, because it won't even be allowed to be published, because you have just complete oversight over the media sector. And it is deeply concerning as to how journalists can continue on with their work, because at the end of the article, I do bring up this point, and I ask the question, well, hey, what about media freedom? I mean, it's in the title after all. It's called the European Media Freedom Act. So what about media freedom? And this builds on to the point that you just had here. And in Article 4, it outlines, it's the only article in the entire text that outlines the rights of media service providers. However, it's really a red herring or a distraction, because what it does essentially is that it provides the rights of media service providers in the context of what the member states cannot do. That's very interesting, because the member states are really stripped of their oversight and authority over the media sector. And while I think it's great and there should be protections of media service providers from abuses by the member states, that's really not the concern here. The concern is about potential abuses of power by the Commission in this proposal, because it has given unprecedented controls over the media sector. So again, let me just repeat that to make it clear. I know it's a lot to take in, but it's an important point. The rights of media service providers is only discussed in the context of what the member states cannot do. And it states that, the member states are not able to surveil or spy on journalists unless that journalist has been in contact with an individual who is posing a risk to public security, or a person who is under active investigation. So it's just complete nonsense. It really does provide a pathway for member states to further spy on journalists and their contacts, and even family members or friends and associates. But that is, while that has been receiving a lot of outrage, and rightfully so, I'm deeply concerned about the potential abuses of power from the Commission itself, which is not at all addressed in Article 4, which states the rights of media service providers. So it's really a red herring. And again, I always just like to make this point here. This is not just my opinion or my assessment. Again, Mr. Ilias Kontias, Executive Director of the EMMA and ENPA, also said, and I'm actually going to quote him here, he says, "Once the risk of political pressure over editorial decisions has been acknowledged, it would be naive to exclude the possibility that it might happen at the European level." And on behalf of the EMMA and ENPS, he said that they are very concerned about this and have even proposed to have Article 4, Section 2 extended to protect media service providers from potential abuses of power by the Commission.
Well, I'm not concerned about abusing of power. I'm sure they will abuse of power. Especially our Prime Minister, who before pandemic, he had a huge meeting with all media, and he pointed finger at them and tell them, "You, all of you," and he says, all televisions, everybody have right to write down exactly what our government, exactly our the crisis board saying. And now, 3 years later, we know that they were lying all the time. Now that can happen for sure, and that will happen in Croatia, because our Prime Minister is the expert for controlling media. And for sure, this else, what you said, except or else, for sure, whatever I'm doing right now is this else. I'm asking a question, unpleasant questions. That's why we are here now. Okay, they want, also one question, important one. What will happen with the journalist in case that he do this? That means he break these rules.
Well, if any, again, they use the phrase media service providers, so it extends to not only journalists, but also anyone who is publishing content to the web and offline and falls within the definition of a media service provider. If you are to consistently violate the principles outlined in this regulation, I would expect that you would not be able to do your job anymore. You would not be able to function as a journalist, as a content creator, and your ability to post information, to put forth information, would be either severely limited or taken away altogether. As far as if there would be any legal repercussions, I have yet to understand if that is a part of this as well. It very well could be. Perhaps in the coming weeks, as this continues to progress through the EU legislative process, we'll be able to understand a little bit more about perhaps the question that you're posing, which is a good question. And I think at this point, it is very fair to say that there is a lot of ambition when it comes to the passing of this particular proposal, the EMFA. The Council, the Commission, and the EU Parliament are all seeking to conclude negotiations on the EMFA before the elections in the spring of 2024. And in fact, the CULT Committee is expected to issue its opinion as early as September, and then this proposal will enter into potentially a trilogue negotiation. So this is progressing quite quickly. As time goes on, we will learn a little bit more, and I would just encourage everybody to keep their eyes on this, because again, you may be hearing this and think, well, I'm not a journalist. I'm not posting information to the web. I'm not doing any print journalism. I'm not a journalist. I'm not in that sort of field. Please understand that this still very much impacts you and your access to truthful information. And I'm sure that if they're listening to this show right now, they get it. They want access to the truth. They don't want the intelligence talking points or government approved talking points. They want access to the truth, and you will not be able to access the truth if this EMFA passes.
And they want to conclude this negotiation before the next election or next year. Why they are so hurried to finish this important act? They can finish it, they can give it to maybe new members that people will elect after we had this crisis the last 3 years.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, I am unable to attribute motive. I can only assume that there's just a serious effort to want to censor for the next so-called crisis, whenever that may be. So there could be some other factors associated with this urge and this rush to get this passed through this EU legislative process, which again, I also realized, throughout the research here is that oftentimes we see that a lot of these different processes are really just put in place to give the illusion of some democratic process when there's no democracy involved here at all. And the complexity of the process, too, is, I really think, designed to turn people off, to make them disinterested, and to just make it so complicated where it's difficult for people to understand exactly, what's going on, what could happen, and that sort of thing. So I'm hopeful that this article, which is again on childrenshealthdefense.eu, it's also available in Croatian and in a variety of European languages, thanks to the fantastic translation team at Children's Health Defense Europe. I always have to give them so much credit. Fantastic team of translators we have over there. I work with them, and it's just such a great pleasure to talk with them and how enthusiastic they are. But anyways, the point here is that check this out, stay on top of this issue. I'm really speaking to people listening now, especially within the EU and Europe, because you have a right to access information. That was the point I was getting at. And if you're not a journalist, and you think this doesn't matter, it absolutely does, because you have to be able to have access to the truth, because that's the first step in making a real change in our world and ensuring a better future for our kids.
Taylor, I have to add something to this. Well, if people ask themselves, they're not a journalist now, things have changed. With this social media, Now there is a much important to be a citizen journalist than before. Professional journalist has a limitation, and they have to make all self-censorship or even go through this control of people who are financing, who are editing, and they don't have freedom to go. The only freedom comes to the citizens. Of course, there is a lot of disinformation for sure. But freedom, it's also right, freedom to speech is also right to be wrong. It doesn't matter, you don't have to be right all the time. You have to give your opinion, even if it's wrong. That's why now that concerns all people who are on the social media, and that's the millions of people, and all of them are some kind of citizen journalist. And this job I'm doing now because I start to become citizen journalist when I saw what is coming from the mainstream media. Let's go back a little in this 3 years ago, exactly last 3 years. Last 3 years we were faced that in the social media especially, I have experience there, all information what we give them during the pandemic, from the start, concerning the lockdown, concerning the masks, concerning lockdown schools, then spreading of virus, vaccines, and especially this passport, COVID passport. Now we see that all this information what were coming from the social media were truth, and what coming from the official sources were propaganda. Now we are facing that they will try to even do more of this, because they can control these big platforms through financing, because they're giving lots of budgets to them. And the only thing that they cannot control is citizen journalists. And now they're giving themselves much more power to do it in the close future.
Yes. So if people thought that the censorship that we experience now, or that we experienced over the past 3 years and before that, was bad enough, and it was, expect it to be worse under this. This will be much, much worse. So it's important to make note that the intent here, I assume, and I can tell just based off of the research that I've done, is that it's not about so much punishing people for sharing certain information if they're just to share a link, but it's about preventing that information from even being viewed by the public at all, either through just not allowing it to be published to begin with, removing the content altogether, and also to managing the viewership and also manipulating the reach, which is very much a form of censorship. I think it's a powerful one. That is because it gives the illusion that there is no censorship, because you're still able to post content, but just nobody's going to see it. So it's a very manipulative tactic here. That's also a component to this EMFA. But as I said, if you thought the last 3 years were bad, if this goes through, it will be way worse. And it's very scary to think about, because these discussions that we're having right now, you may not be able to access or hear these types of discussions that are being had on this particular program. And that is just a huge disservice to the public. And we need to think critically about where our focuses should be, in which certain areas that we want to really speak to our elected officials about, perhaps, or speak to our neighbors and our friends about. So consider this topic, speak about it, raise awareness, and over the next few weeks, as we see some decisions being put forth by the CULT committee in September, which is when they are expected, we can have a better idea of what the best tactics are to ensure that this doesn't pass in the EU, at least in its current form. But I would advocate for this to be completely rejected altogether.
Well, we have to add a short comment from your side. We have already censorship. It's called fact-checking. They are not competent to do this. They're receiving money from the official sources, and they are fact-checking people that even about things that they don't have a clue about it. We can have a
Right.
clear example. Before the United States Congress, there was a discussion between senator and the chief of Twitter, and she asked her, "Are you from the medical experience?" She says no, but you censored all the doctors who have lots of experience, and you done it together with the U.S. government, and now we have this fact-checking already, and they are already censoring, and we don't have much power against them.
Exactly. The fact checking is also, of course, a form of censorship, and it is also, funded and worked in coordination with very powerful entities such as the U.S. government. I am familiar with the clip that you're referring to, and watching that is actually difficult to watch because it has me thinking, what right do these people have to be fact-checking medical professionals, doctors, and scientists? It's absolutely absurd, it's shameful, and it's just completely ridiculous. But fortunately, I think that more and more people have become aware of these issues, and that these social media platforms are becoming largely unpopular. People are quite critical of YouTube's policies. This is becoming more well-known because of what has happened over the past 3 years. But I know that during the heat of the COVID crisis, I did make an effort to try to speak to various doctors and medical professionals, and it was really out of my area and what I typically covered. And while I always was, careful to ensure that the information, made sense and was reported in a fair way that was accessible to the public, as a journalist in covering this topic in particular, you have to look at it in the sense that those scientists who are being uplifted by the media are to be questioned, really, and those who are not being uplifted are to be given some more I'm trying to think of the right word to say here, but should absolutely be listened to, because you don't ever censor or defame those who are really sharing crazy and useless information. You wouldn't go through the effort to do that, to smear these doctors and to really discredit them. You don't do that unless what they're saying is it has some weight to it, but you will uplift those who tend to provide information that serves the government and establishment narrative. So it's always important to remember that there are really no heroes in this field over the past 3 years. Well, there are many actually, but there aren't these, doctors within the government establishment who have some wisdom that is just unknown to others. It's just ridiculous, and we should all be mindful of that point.
And just please, for finish, say message to the public what we can do to stop this act.
Yes, I again just want to thank you for having me on this program to talk about this very important European Media Freedom Act that is very scary, and it is something that we must keep an eye on. I would say talk about this with your friends, family, neighbors, perhaps contact your representatives about this as well. Share this article with them. It's on Children's Health Defense website. That's children'shealthdefense.eu. Again, it's in various languages, also available in Croatian. Read this article, share it, and get familiar with what's really in this proposal. And do not be fooled by the press releases and the speeches that celebrate this. This is not to be celebrated. This is to be condemned. And one of the points that I bring up at the end of the article is that a journalist's duty is not to any government, governmental body, or corporation. A journalist's duty is to the public. It's to you all, to those listening right now. And this very principle that has for so long been cherished could absolutely be jeopardized if this EMFA proposal passes in its current form. So please take a look at this article, share it, get familiar with it, and another big milestone in this particular case and this particular proposal will be expected in September, so coming up very soon here. And I'll continue to report on the latest developments.
Thank you, Taylor. It was really pleasure and helpful, and let's continue this fight because this is really important for the freedom in the future.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Evo, dragi narode, čuli ste što nam spremaju. Naša Europska komisija, dakle članovi smo Europske unije, nas sprema totalnu cenzuru. Zamislite da su to imali protekle 3 godine. Da li možete vjerovati što bi učinili, na primjer, naš premijer koji je onako čuvao, pod kontrolom držao naše medije i naređivao im što smiju govoriti? Pa razni saborski zastupnici koji su nas ismijavali jer smo govorili da govore netočne informacije. Pa što bi se dogodilo sa, ne znam, gospodinom Bačićem koji je htio da nas sve kontrolira preko mobitela, gdje se krećemo za vrijeme lockdowna, što radimo? Dakle, što bi svi ti ljudi radili da su još i ovaj zakon imali u svojim rukama? Siguran sam da bi ga zloupotrebili. Pri tome oni to ne gledaju kao zloupotrebu jer jednostavno tako vide demokraciju i upravljanje u demokratskim društvima. Volim reći jednu rečenicu koju sam čuo što znači sloboda govora. Sloboda govora znači ne samo da imaš pravo reći što misliš, nego imaš pravo biti u krivu. A isto tako, sloboda govora je važna čak i onda kad nemaš što za reći. Stoga pozivam vas toplo da pročitate ovaj članak, podijelite ga sa svima koji su zainteresirani što nam se sprema i da pokušamo što možemo učiniti da to spriječimo, jer već smo do sad iskusili da trenutne političke strukture i elite ne prezaju od ničega kako bi preuzeli potpunu kontrolu nad našim životima, a ne u našu korist, nego u korist njihove vladavine. Hvala vam lijepo za strpljenje, nadam se da vam je bilo zanimljivo i vidimo se uskoro u idućoj epizodi.
Nitko vas neće natjerati da se poklonite zvijeri, učinit ćete to svojevoljno, odbacujući vjeru. Bićete laka meta za zvijer, jer se niste podredili vjeri. Ako se ne podredite vjeri, podredit ćete se zvijeri. Toliko ćete se suobličiti sa ovim svijetom, da nećete ni prepoznati da ste u zabludi. Biće to najveća demonska prevara ikada i pravedno zaslužena osuda nad nepokajanim grešnicima.
Gdje su svi?